Hello, I'm Dilek Tuna. You're watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. Trump vents frustration with allies over the Strait of Hormuz. Trump says he's honoured to take Cuba, who has been hit by island-wide blackout as energy crisis deepens. And Afghanistan accuses Pakistan of killing hundreds in a hospital strike. Now we begin the hour with some breaking news out of Iran. Israel's Defense Minister Israel Katz said on Tuesday that Iran's security chief Ali Larijani had been killed in an Israeli strike. In a statement, Katz says he was just informed of the top Iranian security official's death following Israeli strikes overnight. There's no confirmation from Iran as yet. Ali Larijani is the influential secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council. He was appointed in August 2025 by President Masoud Pezeshkian as the secretary and the representative of Iran's late Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei to the council. He's also been described in Iranian outlets as an advisor to the late Supreme Leader. US President Donald Trump has expressed frustration with countries declining to send warships to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. He said he was unhappy with the response from the UK, who turned down the request. This comes as the conflict in the Middle East enters its third week.
As the conflict in the Middle East enters its 17th day, US President Donald Trump has signalled frustration over the reluctance of allies to support US military efforts, particularly in securing the Strait of Hormuz. Trump earlier called on nations to help safeguard the strait after Iran responded to US-Israeli attacks by using drones, missiles and mines, effectively closing the channel to tankers that normally transport a fifth of global oil and liquefied natural gas. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer refrained from sending warships to the strait, with authorities saying they were considering only the option of deploying drones to search for mines.
Prime Minister of UK, United Kingdom, yesterday told me, I'm meeting with my team to make a determination. I said, you don't need to meet it with the team. You're the Prime Minister. You can make your own. Why do you have to meet with your team to find out whether or not you're going to send some minesweepers to us or to send some boats?
Meanwhile, strikes across the Middle East have continued, with Iraqi security officials reporting drones and rockets attacking the US embassy in Baghdad in what they describe as the most intense assault since the attacks began. Baghdad's Al Rashid Hotel was also struck on Monday, causing damage but no casualties, though no group has claimed responsibility for the attacks. Across Israel, interception explosions were seen in the night sky over Tel Aviv. It comes as the Israeli military says it is advancing operations against Iran, with reports of strikes on Iran's Navy headquarters.
Our pilots attack across Iran all of the time. In the 24 hours, we hit the Revolutionary Guard's Navy headquarters. The Iranian regime used this headquarters to turn the naval arena into a terror arena. In another attack in the heart of Tehran, we hit and destroyed a satellites attack capabilities development center, a center that posed a threat to Israel's and the whole world's space assets and satellites. At the same time, we continue to attack the Basij forces, the Iranian oppression forces.
As the conflict in the Middle East continues, prospects for de-escalation appear limited, with neither the US and Israeli side nor the Iranian side signalling a push towards a ceasefire agreement.
Israel's military says its troops have begun limited and targeted ground operations against the Iran-backed armed group Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Several Western countries have warned that a wider offensive could worsen the humanitarian crisis and prolong the conflict. Here's more.
Canada, France, Germany, Italy and Britain have warned that a major Israeli ground offensive in Lebanon must be averted, saying it could have devastating humanitarian consequences and risk a protracted conflict. The statement also expressed support for Lebanese efforts to disarm Hezbollah and called for urgent engagement between Israeli and Lebanese representatives to negotiate a sustainable political solution. The move came after the Israeli military said on Monday that its troops had begun limited ground operations against Hezbollah positions in southern Lebanon in recent days, aimed at strengthening forward defences. Meanwhile, smoke rose over southern Beirut on Tuesday as Israeli strikes hit multiple areas, with flashes of explosions lighting up the night sky. A statement from the Israeli military said the troops had located and dismantled a Hezbollah weapons cache. The area was reportedly evacuated and weapons and materials used for incitement were seized. Tensions have also spilled across the border. Emergency services in northern Israel reported 3 people injured when a projectile fired from Lebanon struck a building, sparking a fire. Lebanon was drawn deeper into the Middle East conflict on March 2nd after the Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah fired rockets at Israel, claiming retaliation for the killing of Iran's supreme leader at the start of the US-Israel war with Iran. Lebanese authorities report more than 880 people have been killed, over 1 million displaced, and more than 130,000 now living in collective shelters. Israel has maintained positions in southern Lebanon since a ceasefire with Hezbollah in November 2024. But the latest escalation has raised fears the conflict could spiral into a wider regional war.
Missile fire and debris are increasingly hitting Jerusalem as regional tensions spill into densely populated areas, while northern Israel faces fresh rocket and drone attacks from Hezbollah. Along the Lebanese border, Israeli ground operations are expanding, raising fears of a prolonged conflict as casualties mount on both sides. Our correspondent Maria Rodriguez Abalda, who's on the ground, has more.
Here in Jerusalem, missile attacks are becoming more and more frequent, and we can clearly see how the missiles cross the city on their way to Tel Aviv. A massive piece of an Iranian missile fell right here in this Greek compound beside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and also missiles rained debris over the Temple Mount and the Jewish quarter. 6 wounded after Hezbollah rocket impact sparks fire in northern Israel. Rocket and drone fire rained down also in Nahariya with several injured people. Battles now erupting along the Lebanese border. Several divisions entered in the south of the country, amounting to thousands of troops were now operating, with 2 more to join them in the next few days. Israeli fighter jets have continued to strike towns and villages, while state media say 9 people, including 3 paramedics, were killed, and also 2 Israeli soldiers. The ground operations are a new blow to Lebanese sovereignty and will stoke fears of a prolonged Israeli occupation. Hezbollah's Secretary General Naim Qassem has reportedly ordered right-wing forces to move out and begin operating against IDF troops. Right-wing units are Hezbollah's elite assault force, training for cross-border attacks and high-intensity combat. The Lebanese government says the number of displaced people in Lebanon has exceeded 1 million at the moment. Israel continues attacking Lebanon and Iran simultaneously, and Israeli military official expects the war in its neighboring country it will last at least until the end of May, according to local media.
Russia said its forces had captured 12 settlements in Ukraine during the first 2 weeks of March. Meanwhile, Kyiv's air defences intercepted a daytime drone attack with explosions reported across the capital, but no immediate casualties.
Russia launched a daytime drone attack on Kyiv on Monday, Ukrainian officials said, with explosions heard across the capital as air defences worked to intercept the drones. Its forces also captured 12 settlements in Ukraine during the first 2 weeks of March, according to the country's top military officer.
The Forces Group North continues to establish a security zone in the border areas of the Sumy and Kharkiv regions. In March, 5 settlements were taken under control: Bobilivka, Rogozna, Chervona Zaria and Mala Babilivka in the Sumy region and Kruglaya in the Kharkiv region.
Ukraine's Air Force said it shot down 194 out of 211 drones launched in the attack. Officials said about 30 drones targeted the Kyiv region, and some appeared to use upgraded communication systems that allow them to be guided during flight. Drone debris fell in several districts of the capital, including the city's main square. Authorities said no casualties were immediately reported, though residents rushed to shelters as explosions were heard. Russian officials said around 250 Ukrainian drones were intercepted near Moscow over the weekend in what they described as the largest attempted strike on the Russian capital in at least a year. The escalation comes as both sides continue to exchange drone attacks.
Preliminary agreements were reached during the latest China-US trade talks in Paris. Both sides also voiced concerns over unilateral trade measures and pledged to continue discussions to stabilise economic ties.
China and the United States concluded their sixth round of economic and trade talks in Paris on Monday, focusing on tariffs, investment and broader bilateral trade cooperation ahead of President Donald Trump's planned visit to Beijing at the end of March. Chinese Vice Commerce Minister Li Chang'an described the discussions as in-depth, candid and constructive.
Through this consultation, the two sides have already achieved some preliminary consensus on several topics and will continue to engage in consultations going forward.
Li also criticised recent US Section 301 trade investigations, saying China expressed serious concern and warned they could undermine the hard-won stability in China-US economic and trade relations. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent called the meetings very good and constructive, highlighting that the talks demonstrated stability in the bilateral relationship. He added that any postponement of Trump's visit would be due to the ongoing Iran war, not China's commitments.
US President Donald Trump has made remarks about Cuba during comments at the White House, saying he believes he could have the honour of taking the island nation, which he described as currently weakened.
So it could be that we delay it a little bit. I do believe I'll be having the honor of taking Cuba. That'd be good. That's a big honor.
Taking Cuba.
Taking Cuba in some form, yeah. Taking Cuba. I mean, whether I free it, take it, I think I could do anything I want with it. You want to know the truth? They're a very weakened nation right now. They were for a long time. Very violent leaders.
Staying on Cuba, the island has been hit by a nationwide blackout on Monday, impacting 11 million people as its energy and economic crisis deepen and its power grid continues to crumble. Here's more.
Cuba's national electricity grid has collapsed, leaving around 10 million people without power across the island as authorities work to restore electricity. The country's grid operator, Union Electrica, said it is investigating the cause of the outage. Officials ruled out a major power plant failure, but indicated the blackout may have been triggered by a problem in the transmission system. Engineers have begun restoring electricity to small clusters of circuits, known as microsystems, an early step toward reconnecting the national grid. The blackout is the latest in a series of outages affecting the country, where residents have become accustomed to frequent power cuts lasting hours or even days.
The news didn't surprise me. We're already used to living with this. I think we need to become less dependent on what happens at the national level and focus more on our own individual problems. If the national electric power system goes down, people have to find ways to prepare themselves however they can, with wood-burning stoves, with solar panels for those who can get them, with water reserves for those who face shortages, and with gas reserves for those who have access to them, which is actually an even more complicated issue than the power grid.
Cuba's electricity system has struggled in recent years because of aging infrastructure and fuel shortages, which have repeatedly caused major disruptions. The crisis has also intensified political tensions. The United States has increased pressure on Havana this year, including measures aimed at limiting oil shipments to the island, further straining its already fragile energy system.
Residents in Tennessee have been affected by intense storms that have caused significant property damage and power outages. This comes as authorities report severe weather affecting eastern states since Sunday.
This is the aftermath in Tennessee after major storms swept across the United States. Residents in Columbia have been left with severe damage to their homes and vehicles after a tornado followed storms on Sunday. They have expressed fear, with some saying it is the first time they have experienced anything like it.
After going through that last night, I'm very scared of the storms because usually they just go right over us and it's not a big deal. Like my whole life never had to work, you know. They get warnings and watches, but it's never been close to home. It's always went over us down the road, and that's when it hit us, and it was very scary during the middle of it.
It started raining, and I have a cat. He was getting freaked out. I tried to turn the TV on to drown out the sound. I was going to sit down and eat a burger for the night, and it all happened so fast. It hit. I grabbed him. We ran and stayed in the bathroom, and then it kind of calmed down, and all I could hear was just water pouring, and it was just all pouring in my house. And I was trying to set out buckets and towels and stuff, and it was more than I could do.
Following the storms, there have been reports of power outages affecting thousands. However, technical crews are on site in an effort to manage the situation. The National Weather Service had earlier warned of the approaching storms and advised residents to seek shelter in their homes until they passed. It comes as authorities say severe weather is ongoing across eastern states, including Arkansas, Illinois and Alabama, with more than 450 reports of severe weather and 9 confirmed tornadoes since Sunday. So far, no casualties have been reported.
Turning to West Africa now, at least 23 people were killed and 108 injured in suspected multiple suicide bomb attacks in Maiduguri city, capital of Nigeria. Insurgency hit northeastern state of Borno on Monday. The first blast went off at a post office in the city centre and was immediately followed by another at the popular Monday market nearby. The sources and residents said 2 more blasts hit the University of Maiduguri teaching hospital and another struck the eastern neighbourhood of Kaleri in the early evening of Monday. No group has yet claimed responsibility for the suspected bombings. NVIDIA plans to eventually build data centres in space. This was announced by the company's CEO, Jensen Huang, at the annual NVIDIA GTC in San Jose, California. Huang underlined that AI processing across space and ground systems enables real-time sensing, decision-making and autonomy, transforming orbital data centres into instruments of discovery and spacecraft into self-navigating systems. NVIDIA is also targeting the autonomous AI agent market. The company's OpenClaw makes it possible to create personal agents that act as 24/7 personal assistants. Iran's Football Federation says it is in active talks with FIFA about moving its FIFA World Cup matches from the United States to Mexico, citing serious concerns over player safety. Federation President Mehdi Taj says the team will not travel to the US after comments by Donald Trump suggesting security could not be guaranteed. Iran had been scheduled to play group matches in Los Angeles and Seattle. The request comes amid rising tensions and ongoing conflict involving Tehran. FIFA has not yet commented publicly. However, the Asian Football Confederation confirms Iran has not withdrawn and says direct discussions with FIFA are continuing over possible arrangements. After the break, we turn to the latest developments in the war involving Iran as Western allies debate how to respond to growing tensions in the Strait of Hormuz and the widening military campaign. Stay with us.
Hello and welcome to Primetime. What a show we've got lined up for you. In a complex world, security is power. Two hours live, diplomacy dissected in a spin-free environment. That's Prime Time with me, Guy Schoen, weekdays on A News.
Welcome back to A News. European foreign ministers are discussing whether the European Union should help protect shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important energy routes. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas has suggested the bloc could consider adapting its naval mission to help keep the strait open, even as several European countries have declined a US request to join a military effort in the Gulf. At the same time, the conflict itself continues to intensify, with new strikes and growing questions about whether Washington and Israel remain fully aligned on their strategic objectives. Let's bring in our guest, Gustavo de Aristegui, former diplomat joining us from Rabat, Morocco. Now, firstly, welcome to the program, Ambassador.
Thank you so much for having me on the show again.
Now, let's start with the latest news on Iran. Israel's Defense Minister Israel Katz said earlier today that Iran's security chief Ali Larijani has been killed in an Israeli strike. Firstly, if this information is correct, because we're still waiting for confirmation from Iran, what do you see as the immediate implications for Iran and the wider conflict?
Well, let's make a profile of Ali Larijani. He's not just anybody. Ali Larijani has been wrongly pictured in the West as a pragmatic conservative. That's not true at all. Ali Larijani was a very staunch revolutionary. He was only 22 years old when the revolution happened and was a key figure of the beginnings of the Revolutionary Guard. He was a very, very big member of the Revolutionary Guard. And you know that once you're a member of the Revolutionary Guard, you never get out. It's like being a member of the mafia, you know, you can never get out, or intelligence for that much. Ali Larijani was also the chief nuclear negotiator, not only in the 21 deal, the disastrous JCPOA, but in every previous attempt to negotiate with the West on Iran's nuclear program. And he also is the architect of the rapprochement between China and Iran. And, well, of course, he wasn't formally the Minister of Intelligence, but was largely seen as the personal representative of the leader of the revolution at the Supreme Council for National Security, which is, in time of war, the #1 committee that actually manages everything related to the response and to the war effort. So it is not a minor strike. The Americans or the Israelis, I don't know who actually hit them, it probably was the Israelis, knew who they were targeting. And actually, we can see that the fanatical response of the regime in the last days, and how there has been a divide in the regime between the more pragmatic side of the regime, for example, the president of the Islamic Republic, and the more obtuse and fanatical side of the regime, of which Larijani was a very, very prominent member, was widening. And that gap became an abyss. And every time that the president of the Republic apologized to its neighbors for attacks, including Azerbaijan, the Revolutionary Guard would contradict the president of the Republic and even launch an attack to prove that they meant business. That the person that was behind this kind of reaction was doubtlessly Ali Larijani.
Okay, so a key figure indeed, Ambassador, on so many fronts, as you just articulated. Wouldn't there be a predecessor for him in this case? Wouldn't Iran be prepared for such circumstances, do you think?
Of course, but I mean, you cannot replace the strategic thought, if we can talk about strategic thought in a person like this, or experience that he had. Well, we're seeing in your images the negotiations when Mr. Solana was the chief foreign policy representative of the European Union, actually the first one when they were negotiating. But I mean, it's been going on for over 25 years and it's not getting anybody anywhere because, of course, the first ones that don't want to reach any kind of agreement are the Iranians themselves. And definitely this was the strategy of Ali Larijani. So about the successor. Okay. Every high-ranking official in the Islamic Republic of Iran always has a number two that is ready to take over immediately. And they're always grooming somebody behind that. So, of course, you cannot replace the experience, as I said. I mean, General Soleimani, for example, you can see that the Al-Quds forces have been much less effective since he was eliminated. Or you can see that many key figures that were essential to the running of the Islamic Republic when they were eliminated in the first days of the war have been, of course, replaced by people that were groomed for the positions, but they're not by far as savvy and as experienced as the people that they're replacing.
Okay, Ambassador, let's move on now to what we initially intended to discuss with you today. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas says Europe's discussing whether it could adapt its naval mission to help keep the Strait of Hormuz open. How serious is that proposal, and what role could the EU realistically play here?
Well, I hope that for once they mean business. I mean, the European Union has demonstrated over and over again, time and time again, that our structure and decision-making process is not adapted to the very complex, dangerous, and unstable world that we live in. And you know, we cannot live in a community that has 27 member states, and anything related to security and foreign policy needs unanimity, because there's never going to be any decision made at all if that is the case. And then when the president of the Commission says things that, in my view, were very reasonable and very balanced, then she was criticized by Costa, the president of the council, by Mrs. Kallas, because she said it was her responsibilities. This is not about responsibilities. This is about the future of the European Union. And the European Union really needs to take seriously the world that we live in. It is not about not wanting international law to prevail. It is by accepting that the majority of key players in the world don't respect, and if you don't mind me saying, couldn't care less about international law, international humanitarian law, anything of the sort. So we are playing in a very dangerous game with one or two arms tied at our back, and this is very seriously hindering the capacity of the European Union not only to play a role in the world, but to defend itself correctly. We're seeing what is happening in the war in Ukraine. But about the specific task of escorting gas tankers and oil tankers that need to come out of the Strait of the Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz to feed a thirsty world that needs oil and gas for industry and to keep prices balanced and reasonable. Well, that is something that the Americans already asked the Europeans 15 days before the first strikes, especially the British, when they asked the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom to send a striker group, the Prince of Wales aircraft carrier group, to defend the coasts of the countries of the Gulf that are allies of the West, friends of the West, and former colonies of the United Kingdom. They refused. This is the direct consequence. And now the Indians and the Chinese are negotiating directly with the Iranians to secure safe passage of their gas tankers and oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. India has restricted the use of LPG and GNL, because they have reserves only until the end of March. And gas in India is essential not only for industry, it's essential for everyday life in India, for the street food, or for homes. Everybody in India, except some people that burn wood, rely on bottled gas to cook. It is a disaster for them. But they should not only be, of course, they're not a part of any former alliance, but we're all victims of this regime. We're all victims of the blocking of the Strait of Hormuz. And this is going to teach us several lessons. First, that we need to act together and we need to be in permanent foresight of problems. Second, that the world needs to seriously consider building gas and oil terminals in Oman for future reference, and building pipelines going through there. And third, the Saudis had already foreseen this eventuality, and they had built several oil pipes that go from Deraa province all the way to Jeddah. And right now it's at its peak capacity, sending over 7 million barrels of oil every day to the port of Jeddah. So these things need to stick to us. And the European Union has to stop dragging its feet and discussing about perfectly useless things, bureaucratic obstacles of all kinds, and start seriously thinking about our position in the world, because we have a responsibility in the world also. We are the richest market in the world, 550 million people that are members of the most advanced club of democracies and markets in the world. We cannot rely on the United States to be our shield anymore. We have to be our own shield, and we have to be the shield for others too. And it is about time that we start thinking in that way.
Okay, Ambassador, we're a little short on time, so we'll leave it there for the day. Thank you so much for joining us once again. We always appreciate your analysis.
Thank you so much, Dilek. All the best.
Now, after the break, we'll take a look at the major stories from the region. Stay with us. Now let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. As the conflict continues to escalate, residents in Iran's capital, Tehran, are sharing their views on the war and its possible outcome. While daily life in the city continues, many people say the situation has brought uncertainty and tension as the fighting enters another week.
17 days into the escalating Middle East conflict, Tehran has been repeatedly targeted by strikes, bringing the reality of the war directly to Iran's capital. With uncertainty growing and no clear end in sight, the conflict is weighing heavily on the country and its people. For many residents in Tehran, the hope is that the conflict will eventually give way to a settlement that prevents further escalation and brings long-term stability to the region. Tehran bookseller Ali Akbar Hosseini said he believes the conflict should not end on terms imposed from outside powers.
We did not start this war in order to grant a ceasefire. If they want a ceasefire, they must grant it, because they brought their equipment from the other side of the world to this side of the world. Thank God, we are in our own home and defending it.
He also argued that Iran's political future, if it were ever to change, should be determined by the Iranian people themselves.
Their intention is to change our system, and I consider such a thing unlikely. This depends on the people, whether they want it or not. If the people want this, there is no need for war. They can easily hold a referendum and determine whether they want it or do not want it.
Some in Tehran say any end to the conflict must come with guarantees that the fighting will not simply return months later.
We definitely want the war to end, but not so that 6 months later it starts again. The war must advance to a point that creates a settlement so that the same situation doesn't repeat.
He also voiced skepticism about the intentions of foreign powers involved in the conflict.
Every foreign country is only after taking the interests of our country. This is very obvious. It can be oil, firstly oil. There are also other issues, like the same thing they did with Venezuela. But our nation is a nation that will stand firm until the shadow of war is lifted from the country.
Iranian humanitarian authorities say the war is having a severe impact on civilian infrastructure and daily life across the country. According to the organization, around 29,000 homes outside Tehran and 10,000 residential units in the capital have been affected. Thousands of commercial properties have also reportedly been damaged.
A devastating airstrike in Kabul has left hundreds feared dead, marking a major escalation in regional tensions. Afghan officials are blaming neighbouring Pakistan for targeting a hospital, a claim Islamabad denies. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has the details from Kabul.
A spokesman for the Afghan government says at least 400 people were killed and around 250 injured when an airstrike hit a drug rehabilitation hospital in the capital late Monday evening. Witnesses report hearing multiple explosions as patients and staff were finishing evening prayers, with bombs striking patient wards and other parts of the facility. Local media footage shows flames engulfing sections of a hospital complex, thick smoke rising into the night sky, and emergency teams carrying bodies away on stretchers. Authorities say the target site was a large state-run treatment center with up to 2,000 beds, and rescue operations are still ongoing as crews search for victims and try to contain the damage. Pakistan has rejected the allegation, calling them false and misleading, and insists its forces carried out precise strikes against what it describes as a militant infrastructure. The incident comes amid intensifying conflict between the two neighbors, which began last month and has already seen cross-border attacks and rising casualties on both sides. China has urged restraint, calling for a return to negotiations, while the United Nations has expressed concern over reports of civilian deaths. However, casualty figures remain unverified, and independent confirmation has not yet been possible as tensions continue to rise. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Canada's Foreign Minister Anita Anand has arrived in Turkey to discuss ways to strengthen bilateral ties and address regional security issues, including the Middle East and the Persian Gulf. During her visit to Ankara, Anand is scheduled to meet with Turkey's Vice President Cevdet Yılmaz, Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan and other senior officials. Discussions are expected to focus on security and economic cooperation, expanding trade, renewable energy projects and defence industry partnerships. The two sides are also set to exchange views on regional crises, including the Gaza situation, the Russia-Ukraine war and developments in Syria. Kazakhstan has adopted a new constitution following a national referendum on the 15th of March, in which 87% of participating voters supported the proposal, according to the Central Referendum Commission. 9 million of the 12 million eligible voters cast ballots, resulting in a turnout of 73%. Among those who voted, almost 8 million supported the proposal, while nearly 900,000 voted against. The remaining ballots were declared invalid. According to protocols submitted by territorial referendum commissions, the new constitution has been adopted. Kazakhstan is taking a step toward entering the European green energy market. Lawmakers in Astana have ratified a strategic agreement with Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan that could pave the way for a new trans-regional energy corridor linking Central Asia to Europe. The project focuses on exporting renewable electricity through routes across the Caspian and Black Seas as demand for clean energy continues to grow.
Kazakhstan's Majlis has ratified the strategic partnership agreement with Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan on green energy. The project could reshape the region's energy landscape and open a direct route to European markets. The deal was signed by the three countries' leaders in Baku in 2024 on the sidelines of COP29. It aims to link the energy systems of Central Asia and the South Caucasus into a single export network. The plan is to deliver renewable electricity from Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan to Azerbaijan and then onto Europe. A key part of the project is a high-voltage subsea cable along the bottom of the Caspian Sea. It's technically complex, but officials say it's essential for direct access to the European Union's electricity market. The feasibility study is already backed by international partners. The Asian Development Bank and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank have confirmed grant funding of around $2 million. The study itself is estimated at about 1 million euros. In Astana, officials say the project will strengthen export capacity and support technological development. Kazakhstan is also looking to position itself as a key energy hub in Eurasia as demand for clean energy grows and Europe looks to diversify its supplies. Pariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
After the break, we turn to diplomacy in the region as Canada's Foreign Minister Anita Anand arrives in Turkey for talks with her counterpart Hakan Fidan amid growing tensions across the Middle East. We'll see you shortly.
With Mars, the global AI and sensor technology starts now.
We need to adapt much quicker and much faster to allow us to detect, to classify, and to ultimately defeat these new asymmetric threats. We can use NIDAR to autonomously instruct and guide that asset, whether it be a tracked UGV or a surveillance drone.
Welcome back to A News. Canada's Foreign Minister Anita Anand is in Turkey for high-level talks with Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan, with the agenda expected to include strengthening bilateral cooperation as well as discussions on regional security and the ongoing war in the Middle East. Both countries are NATO allies, and officials say the visit reflects increasing diplomatic engagement between Ankara and Ottawa at a time of heightened geopolitical tensions. Let's bring in our guests now. Bekir İlhan joins us from Turkey Research Foundation in Ankara. Bekir, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Now, the visit comes at a time of major regional tensions. What are the key objectives here of this visit?
Yeah, I would say it's going to be an important visit in terms of bilateral relations and regional issue, and also in terms of timing. I would say, there are many crises in the region right now, from Gaza to, Iran, and Iran to the war in Ukraine, and both countries, can cooperate on many issues, I would say. Of course, as I said, there is a regional dimension, but I think for this visit, I think the bilateral issues, economic issues, trade issues, on cooperation issues, would be on the table as well. And I think that the focus will be the bilateral issues, I would say, because the Foreign Minister of Canada, will not only visit or will not only meet with her counterpart, Hakan Fidan, but also will meet with Turkish Energy Minister Alparslan Bayraktar, and also, Turkey and Canada just signed a cooperation memorandum or cooperation agreement a couple of weeks ago on nuclear issues. Turkey is seeking a potential partner to diversify its peaceful nuclear research, and I would say, and the Canada is also one of the countries that Turkey can cooperate with, and I would say in terms of trade and economy, economy, the current trade volume is around $3 billion between two countries, and I would say it has a potential in the future, I would say. And as for regional issues, of course, the war in Iran and the war in Gaza are also important topics for both countries, and I would say also the regional issues will be on the table as well.
So, Bekir, the Middle East crisis is certainly expected to feature prominently in the talks. What role could Turkey and Canada potentially play in pushing for de-escalation here?
Yeah, de-escalation is an important matter here. But both Turkey and Canada, both countries are seeking, stability and peace in the region right now. I would say first of all, of course, geographically, Turkey and Canada are far apart, but politically, they can make an important contribution to the peace in the region, I would say, especially, given the role of Turkey. Turkey is experiencing the challenges and difficulties of the conflicts in first hand, I would say, because it's located in the region right now. But on the other hand, we have Canada. Canada, yes, it's geographically, it's far away from the Middle East, but I would say in Canada, there is a huge, Muslim community. There is a huge Arab community, also. It's also very important for the Canadian foreign policy to, answer the demands and the grievances of its domestic communities, because, the war in Gaza, the war in Lebanon, also the Canada, has a huge Lebanon community, I would say, in domestic reasons, I would say Canada is much more interested in solving conflicts in the region, I would say. On the other hand, also, Canada position itself as a humanitarian country. It's just what they are saying. It position itself as a humanitarian aid country, and for conducting humanitarian aid operations, I would say Canada needs stable and strong partners in the region, I would say. And I would say at this point, Turkey comes as an important trading, as an important cooperation partner, I would say. And for sure, any country, who wants to stability and peace in the Middle East, has to cooperate with Turkey at some point, more or less. Turkey is a stronger country in the Middle East, and it also has a very diverse diplomatic relations, and also Turkey has its own interest in peace in the Middle East right now, and that's why I think that Canada is, pays and attached higher importance for Turkey in terms of, bringing peace in the Middle East, I would say.
So, Bekir, both countries are NATO allies, but they often approach regional crises from different diplomatic perspectives. Could this visit help align their positions more closely, do you think?
Yeah, I would say at some point, Canada and Turkey, as you said, are NATO allies, and also I would say the Canada and Turkey, has been allies around, 80 years. But right now, I would say, yes, there are many issues that, the preference of both countries could diverge. It's quite normal, I would say. But in the past, I would say, just recall that Canada imposed sanctions on Turkey. Canada imposed defense industry sanctions on Turkey due to Turkish anti-terror operations. Of course, Turkey, does not forget that, but it does not mean that Turkey reject any kind of possible cooperation with Canada. Of course, Turkey is open to cooperation, but on equal terms, on allied terms, I would say, because if you're a NATO ally, you should help your ally in the alliance, I would say. But Turkey is experiencing difference. Turkey didn't see such a good intentions from Canada at that time. I'm talking about a couple of years ago. Turkey was conducting an anti-terror operations in Syria. Actually, it was in 2019, I would say. Canada imposed arms embargo on Turkey, and then they lifted it. But anyways, at some point, Canada, approached Turkey that way. But I think that after the war in Ukraine, many NATO allies changed their stance towards Turkey, because they know that without Turkey, the Euro-Atlantic security is incomplete, I would say. And also they need Turkey more than ever right now, both in terms of crisis in Middle East and crisis in Russia, I would say, in Ukraine, I would say. And for these kind of factors, I would say Canadians, I think have come to the conclusion that they need Turkey, and they cannot produce a stable position and produce a stable foreign policy in Middle East without Turkey, I would say.
Okay, so on the foreign policy, Turkey, despite the differences and the embargoes that you just mentioned from Canada to Turkey sits at a strategic crossroads between Europe, the Middle East and Eurasia. How valuable is that position for Canada's broader foreign policy engagement?
Yeah, I would say, as I just mentioned, Canada position itself as a humanitarian foreign policy country, it's also on their, national security papers. They just endorse such a position. In reality, of course, it's debatable, whether a country can do can pursue such a foreign policy or can pursue such a position, or genuinity of this position also can be discussed. But it's a different story, I would say. But at some point, if Canada position itself in such a position, as I said, they need some stable and strong countries to cooperate with, to conduct humanitarian operations and to conduct humanitarian aids, I would say. And also, if Canada needs stability and peace in the Middle East due to its domestic communities, I would say countries like Turkey, given Turkey's experience in moderation and mediation roles, I would say Turkey occupies an important position in the Middle East, I would say. And of course, Turkey is the inevitable actor that you need to find a way to cooperate with. And for sure, you may have many, different divisions, or you may have many problems with Turkey. But at some point, you gotta, disregard these details or disregard these minor problems to engage to take the bigger picture, I would say. And for sure, for that reason, I would say the Canadian foreign minister's visiting Turkey will be an important step further to relations. Turkey wants just a win-win relations. As I said, Turkey also needs partners. Turkey needs also cooperation partners, I would say. Of course, Turkey needs allies as well, but it's quite normal. But, the agreements or the relations should be an equal basis, I would say. This is what Turkey wants from its ally, and also Turkey wants from its allies that to accept Turkey's new position. Of Turkey is not just a simple NATO country. The other allies, the other NATO allies, cannot treat Turkey as just an ordinary NATO country. But for now, Turkey's position has changed too much given its population, military power, economic power, I would say. And for now, individually, I would say Turkey stands in a different position in NATO, and for sure, Turkey also pursues its NATO membership, but Turkey's individual role in different crises, make Turkey as an inevitable actor in the eyes of countries like Canada and other European allies, I would say.
Okay, Bekir, thank you so much for joining us on the program today. We always appreciate your analysis.
Thank you. Have a good day.
That's the news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for more updates, and thank you for watching.